Guess what time it is?
Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is time for our annual book review. Now, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm just gonna go ahead right off the bat. I want you to take your expectations. If they're up here, I want you to go and put them down here. And if they're here, let's just go ahead and turn off the video.
Why?
Because I was looking at my books that I read this year.
Sucky reading year for you?
No, I liked them. I don't think anyone is going to like any of the books that I read this year.
No. I see quite a few goodies.
There's a couple, yeah. So I just was looking through it and I'm like, I don't
think...
You
have a premiere taste.
Premiere? That's fascinating.
I couldn't think of the right word. I'm just going to go with that.
Eclectic?
What you drinking today?
Actually, I was drinking some regular coffee and now I'm drinking some iced coffee and I didn't want to...
In a mug?
I didn't want to dirty... I already had a mug dirty, so...
I used my Christmas gift, the Nugget Ice Maker, put some ice and got a little mini can of Diet Coke, and that's... I don't think I've ever drank Diet Coke on camera. I couldn't tell you the last time I drank some, but here we are.
Do you feel like you're in the...
90s?
In the hop?
What?
In a hop? No?
What's that?
Like a sock hop?
What?
I don't know. Did they have crushed ice back when they had a sock hop? I don't know. Seems very 50s to me.
I thought you were referencing the fact that it's Diet Coke, that was like a 50s thing. I'm like, what?
No, I just feel like having a soda...
Having a soda. Going to the soda.
At your drive-in. Doesn't seem very 50s to me.
Okay. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah.
Like Sonic Drive-In, I'm pretty sure
Get on my level.
Okay. You're right. All right. So. We were just...
So, okay. Here's the deal. Did you hit your reading goal this year?
Why would you ask me that?
Well, I only say that because I try and read 50 books a year. In the last several years, I've done that. This year, I knew there was a lot of bigger books that I wanted to read.
Yeah.
So I read 30 books, but that was still, I'm very happy with that. And especially because I knocked off so many that had been sitting there that I'm like, I'm not going to read it because it's such a big beast of a book. That said, I'm only going to show like 15-ish, 20-ish. Yeah. And then really only talk about 10. So we're doing it a little bit different this year.
Yeah.
And I know you kind of said you have it set up a similar way. Like
I thought we were just doing top 10.
Right, but you had honorable mentions and stuff.
Okay, yeah, I have a couple honorable mentions and a couple dishonorable mentions that I did not enjoy. I'm excited to talk about those too, because I think some of you guys will disagree with me, but I'm just sharing my opinion. But, no, I did not reach my reading goal. Okay, thanks for asking.
Sorry, I didn't mean to bring up a sore subject
I think I was only off by like 2. If I finished one more book I'm working on, I was only off by like 2 books, which honestly...
That's awesome.
I had kind of slow seasons this year with reading. Yeah. And a couple longer books, too, that took me longer than I thought. So we'll get into all that. But
I should have just asked.
It was not...
I was thinking about numbers. That's why I was thinking about your reading goal.
I'm totally kidding.
Right.
That's my own thing. I got close.
Do you want to do our top 10 first and then do the honorable mentions after that?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
So
do you have yours
first.
ranked? I've ranked mine.
I've got them ready.
All right, we're starting 10 to 1?
And some of these... Yeah, starting at number 10.
Okay.
I'm laughing because there's some that I actually think maybe I liked more, but I know no one else is going to like, so I put them in my honorable mention. Yeah.
Well,
so, you're guys going to laugh when you see the ones that are in my top 10 list. Like, what did you cut out?
All right, coming in at number 10. And I wonder if you have it in yours. I don't think you do. Oh, yes, you do. Okay. Number 10 for me was my favorite memoir that I read this year. And I read, I think, 4 or 5 memoirs.
Memoirs.
And this was my favorite one. It was Be Ready When the Luck Happens by Ina Garten. If you don't know who she is, I think you introduced me to her long ago. She had like her own specialty food store. This is so random and specific. But she had her own specialty food store in...
The Hamptons.
The Hamptons. I always want to say Nantucket. No. The Hamptons. When she was younger. And she kind of became known.
She worked in the White House before that.
That's right, yeah. But that was not why she was known.
No, I know, but her trajectory...
But still, I know, her life, and maybe that's what it is.
Fascinating.
Her life trajectory has been so odd. But anyway, she eventually went on to like create cookbooks, and she's had multiple different shows. But there's something about her, if you've ever watched, her show, the store was called Barefoot Contessa. So her show was called Barefoot Contessa. She got cookbooks. And that was just the name of the shop she acquired. Yeah, it wasn't even like something she came up with. But it kind of somehow perfectly sums her up because she seems so elegant. Like she always talks about dinner parties and like shows that in her shows. And they're so nice and intricate and wonderful. But she also is so great about keeping things simple and saying it's okay if, one of her mantras is store-bought is fine. Yeah. Like buying some things in the store, it's okay. Anyway, I could gush for her.
I know.
This book was so fascinating. We ended up listening to the audiobook together and hearing her tell her story and like some really big revelations that she shared about her life that I don't think anyone knew until this. And so it was interesting. But I do wonder if you didn't have any knowledge of her, if you would like this book at all.
Oh, I don't think so. You'd have to know.
Do you think you've got to at least have some
personality.
Kind of, a little bit.
Yeah.
To then find it. Because I'm like, it just probably, and maybe that's true for most memoirs. Some memoirs stand alone that are just good. Viola Davis's is one of the best I've ever read. And I didn't know much about her at all. And it was wildly fascinating.
Matthew McConaughey's book was so good too.
Who's good?
I only know.
People feel a way though about him.
Really?
And I could see now, like having read it and then see, I'm like, okay, I kind of could see. But it was interesting. There's no doubt.
I don't really know anything about him, like now or as a person or whatever. I've only seen him in like 1 or 2 movies, but his book was a great book.
Yeah, I don't know much about him other than his book, which is, I guess, a lot of his life.
Yeah. She's elegant without being pretentious.
She's perfect.
She's perfect. She can do no wrong. Also, she gained a lot of notoriety during COVID when she had this bit on Instagram about how she had like a giant martini glass, and she tells the story about it, and then she makes a cocktail in it, and it's like an entire bottle of this. And then she's like, cheers. Anyway.
She said the funny part about that is she's like, I don't even really drink. Anyway.
She always makes, she's...
Oh, it's your turn. What's your number 10?
All right, so this one is just, again, they're all very specific books that I have this year. This one is called Since the World Began. This has been out for a very long time. I think it was 1996 when it came out, and it's all about Walt Disney World. And it was they came out with one for the 50th anniversary. This was the 25th anniversary coffee table book, essentially, of Walt Disney World. And there are so many pictures in this that even through all the years that I had not seen before, there were so many good pictures. There were so many stories, and there were so many, like even during the construction phases. Like this is where that one picture was, where I'm like, I had never seen actual pictures of them like dredging Seven Seas Lagoon and stuff like that. So it's just fascinating. But it also talks about a lot of their future plans, and some of them did come to fruition and some did not. So it's just interesting to hear, like, this is before Animal Kingdom opened, and hearing their, like, here's what's coming in Animal Kingdom. And a lot of it did come to pass, a lot of it didn't. But also there was so much stuff, like, especially like in the Hollywood Studios section, it talks all about the different rides that were there at the time and all the different...
so it's kind of, a lot of those rides have since closed. Exactly. Every night that you were reading this, he'd be like, Jess, because we usually read in bed. He'd be like, Jess, you got to read this. And he'd be like, all right, read from here to here, and it's like 6 pages. I'm like, and it was all fascinating.
And there was always, like, this one here is super interesting, talking about how they originally envisioned World Showcase in Epcot. Like, this is one that I might do when we do a history episode on the Disneyville podcast. This is the one I might talk about, because it's so different than what they ended up doing. And I had never heard about this. So there's so many things that, I've got shelves of Disney books. I've forgotten more about Disney than most people will ever know. And yet there were still things in this book that I had never heard before. And it was just very
cool. Who would have guessed, though, that a book like that's old, that you'd be like, oh, this is outdated.
Right.
Could have so much interesting Disney lore in it, because things that just never were to be.
Yep.
Anyway, if you're into Disney, check out Disneyville podcast. That's our podcast. Anyway, that one is kind of on my list to actually just read as well, because everything you have me read, I'm like, well, I obviously highly interested. Okay, my number 9, Lessons in Chemistry.
It's a huge book right now.
Oh yeah, and it has been for a couple years.
Yeah.
It's just so good. So it's set in the, I want to say 50s or 60s, I think 50s. And it's just about this woman that basically is a career woman in that time. And she's a scientist, and no one really takes her seriously. And she's married, things happen. I don't want to spoil anything, so I won't share. But anyway, and it just shares basically about her life and raising her daughter. And it is just one of those books that, as I'm reading, I'm like, this is okay. But as I can't put it down, though. So I'm like, looking back, I'm like, no, that one was really good, actually. And they do have that miniseries. I still have not watched, I know. But it's
about that.
Brie Larson plays the main character, which is honestly probably perfect casting. And the bits I've seen of it, I'm like, perfect. So it's on my list, but that is just an all-around good book. If you want a good book that's not like rom-com, but it still is light like that at times. Do you know what I mean? That's a good book.
Yeah.
It's a little heavier than like a fun little rom-com book, but it's not too heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's nice. Yeah. It's funny.
It's a good level of book.
There are so many shows of books that we've read, and we haven't watched
I
any
know,
of them.
and
I don't know.
movies too, because we have more time to read than we do to. That's not true.
That's not true.
We just really lean into TV
Yeah.
versus movies.
But also,
Although that
there's
is
mostly
a
miniseries.
miniseries.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why. Because there's
Crazy.
there's just so many other shows that we want to watch. Like
I
we're always
know.
watching something like
Well, when you already know the storyline,
yeah.
it's like, well, I already know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, like we'll watch like Only Murders in the Building, or we'll watch other shows that are just TV shows versus because we just have so many good shows. We're in a golden age of television. Okay, so this is actually the book I'm reading right now. I'm about halfway through it.
Number 9. You're
this is
already
my
putting it at number 9.
Because so this is If you don't know, I'm trying to read a biography about every U.S. president. So I've read 6 of them so far.
You've been toggling back and forth from like
Right.
earliest to most
Right,
recent.
because I didn't
going
want to do them
backwards.
in sequential order because I kind of thought I would just get bored.
Yeah.
So I went and I did like George Washington, and then I started at Obama, and I've been going back and forth. So then I did John Adams, and then I did Bush, and then I've kind of gone back and forth.
Yeah.
I'm skipping forward a little bit though to do one on Andrew Jackson because we want to visit the Hermitage, and so that's his place in Nashville. And so this is the American Lion book. What?
When you say it that way, it's like he's still living there. That's his place.
That's his place. We're gonna go visit. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't know much about Andrew Jackson at all.
I knew he was like, didn't they like he was more common? Like he was,
Yeah.
you could grab a beer with him. That
Basically
kind of
yeah.
president.
But his life was utterly fascinating, and there was so much about. Like I've heard a little bit about his presidency, but I didn't know anything about him himself. He himself, him himself. About
Himself.
I didn't know anything about him. So he, first of all, he grew up during the Revolutionary War. His mother and 2 brothers were killed during the Revolutionary War. He grew up in South Carolina, and then South Carolina basically ended up trying to secede during his presidency.
Oh, yeah. that was during his
during
presidency?
his presidency. And so that was a big point
One
of
of my
contention.
brothers read this book.
Maybe. His wife died a week. I think it was a week before he was to be inaugurated. So he basically won the presidency, and then right after, like should be this big jubilation and whatever. And then his wife died, and
Jeez.
it was it's fascinating. So his life was crazy, but it won the Pulitzer, and it was written by John Meacham, and I've read a couple of his books. They're really good. But anyway, fascinating guy, and I'm really glad that I've read it. Now I'm going to try and read it before we go, but it's just it's a very, very interesting book.
Cool. All right. Number 8. Yeah, we got to text Michael about that.
Because there's a couple. I have another one by H.W. Brands that I haven't read yet. And so I wanted to read this one first because this one won the Pulitzer, and I thought, well, if I'm going to read one, then that's probably the one.
Yeah, sure. Okay, my number 8 is What Happened to You, which you've also read, and I think it was one you mentioned. No, you read it last year, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about another one. Yes, okay. You'll see why I'm talking about that.
That's one I read last year and told you to read. So yeah, this is a recommendation from Tyler. So it's Oprah Winfrey and this Dr. Bruce D. Perry. No, I was going to see if it rang a bell. No. This is one of those books. I've read similar ones, so I think a lot of it for me, I was like, okay, yeah, like I just heard it before, which is not a bad thing because then you actually remember a decent amount of it. But it's kind of like this conversation between Dr. Perry and Oprah, and I think he was like her psychologist, or maybe it's just, no, I don't think so. I think it's just someone they knew each other. I
think so, yeah.
But anyway, they basically just go through, and this was a while ago now, it was the beginning of the year that I read this, but they basically go through why people are the way they are, or why they might be the way they may be, because of their past traumas, and traumas that you may not think are traumas, but actually really do alter the way someone thinks. So it wasn't always the most dramatic, like when you think of trauma and you think of worst, like horrible things you've heard that have happened to people, it's not always that dramatic. And I think that piece of it was kind of eye-opening to me to think about, even in your own life, things that have happened to you, not just when you were young, but like even in young adulthood, things that have happened around you or to people around you that may affect the way you view things. They do. They shape who you are. They shape how you react to things, how you think about things. So a lot of it sounds obvious, but they really do a good job of, I think, presenting some pretty heavy and heady stuff in a way that absolutely makes sense. You know what I mean?
This was the first book like this that I had read. And it was very, very eye-opening. And I always think about it, really kind of changed my perspective on a lot of people, because a lot of times you kind of go back to when somebody treats you really poorly or whatever. I mean, sometimes it's your fault, but a lot of times you got to go back and be like, okay, that reaction did not make sense to me. And you're like, well, they're coming at it from a very different perspective. Their lives have been shaped by this, so that's why they're so you know,
when I said this, that triggered this in them,
Right,
and that's why
exactly,
they
yeah.
reacted that way, whereas I wouldn't have reacted that
right.
way. Yeah.
And we get, you know, negative comments on YouTube videos and stuff like that. I'm like, this has very little to do with me and more to do with their life experience as to why they're acting like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I found it very fascinating.
Yeah, that's a good read. That one, I think I listened to half of it, and it was Oprah and him. Like, it was actually them having that conversation, and I really, really liked that. I feel like that was maybe the best way to... Although there was a lot of charts in there that were kind of... Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do a hybrid approach on that one, maybe.
Yeah. What's your number 8?
Okay. So this one... this is not even that big of a book. I'm pretty sure I really liked this book, but it took me forever to get through it, and I don't know why. Like I said, it just was one of those books that, for whatever reason...
Well, what is it?
Okay, so it's called Pompeii, and it's literally a novel about when Pompeii exploded. Pompeii! No. Anyway, Music Man, just forget it.
Okay.
So it's obviously like historical fiction and that kind of stuff, but it was about this guy. He was a land surveyor or something like that. See, I'm already forgetting this. But he was like a land surveyor, and then they started to see like all these things were happening on the mountain and stuff like that, and then it actually goes through when it actually exploded.
Wait, a land surveyor back in that time?
He worked for not a land surveyor. He was
Like
worked for the
cartographer,
aqueducts.
or?
That's what it was. He worked for the aqueducts, and so he's on the mountain trying to figure out like they were running out of water, and they're figuring. And then Pliny the Elder has a role in this, and anyway, it was a interesting novel, and part of the reason I liked it is because I read it while we went to go see Pompeii this year, and that was very cool. So
He was literally walking around reading the book while we were looking at the room.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
But I was reading this book at the time, and so it was really cool because I read like the first 70%, and then we visited Pompeii, and then I read the last 30%. And it's funny because I had all these visions in my head of what it was going to look like and be like, and then I'm like, the last 30% of this book looked totally different in my mind than the first 70%, because
that was one of the coolest places I've ever been in my life.
It was so cool, and I will say it looks so totally different than what I thought it was going to be in my head.
Yeah.
Like, there are still roads, there are still, like, I mean, the
town
bases
is
of
there.
buildings.
I mean, it's all connected. Oh my gosh, I could talk about that all day.
In my head, Pompeii was like a big open field with like a few little like fragments of rock sticking out. It was not like that.
No, it is like a completed...
And just there's so... Anyway... If
you're interested, vlogs are to come. Yeah.
Yes, those vlogs are coming up here soon, and I'll tell you the whole story about it. It's way more fascinating than what I initially knew about Pompeii.
Yeah. I remember even as a kid learning about the story of Pompeii and being fascinated by it even then.
Yeah.
And think about how much you learn in, like, let's say elementary school, and all of it is gone.
Yeah.
But that is something that I know for me and many people I've talked to that it just sticks in your brain because it's so wild.
Well, and again, you have the people always think that they're actual people, but it's not. They put plaster of Paris in these molds that basically were these people that died in Pompeii. So they're not actual humans, like frozen humans. It's the
like a negative mold almost.
Yeah, but they're fascinating to be able to see them, and we saw a few while we were there, and it's fascinating. There's also a documentary that my brother and his girlfriend were watching before we left, and they said it was amazing, and I think it was on Netflix, I want to say. But anyway, apparently it was like amazing, and it was like they're using all this modern technology to basically remap Pompeii, and it looked really cool. So,
yeah, that's awesome.
Anyway,
my number 7 was Yellowface. So this was a novel about this woman who was friends with this. They were 2 writers basically, and one of them was way more successful than the other. And I'm not spoiling anything because this happens within like page 1. Okay, the successful writer dies, and the main woman decides to take an unpublished draft of hers and publish it herself as her own. And it honestly is such an incredible... maybe I should move it up. It was a book I could not put down because it's written in today's term, like you will just fly through it. But it is such an interesting idea, not because just the idea is an interesting thought, what would happen if you did that, but it touches on race relations, cultural relations, social media today, cancel culture, like everything. And you see it from both sides, all over. Like, it doesn't, and it's just one of those things that I'm like, it was such an interesting book. I've told you, like, that is a novel you would enjoy.
Yeah.
That one I listened to, and it was, I don't think I've ever listened to an audiobook more. That was the only one I caught myself walking around the house listening to on my phone. Usually I'll listen to it like in the car or whatever, but I was walking around needing to know how that chapter ended. So that is one Maybe I should move that up.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a great one.
It's on my list. I might need to move it up on my list too.
You should. That's a novel. You'd fly through it. I mean,
yeah, that does sound good.
I could see that definitely being a really great movie.
Oh, I'm sure it's in the works.
Oh my gosh, it's gotta be.
Okay, so again, we visited Rome this year. My cousin got married there, and so we made a whole trip out of it. And so
that's when we went to Pompeii too.
Yes. And so Roma, the novel of ancient Rome, there's actually, I think, a trilogy of these now. And so this is the first of the trilogy. It's sort of like, what's the guy who, I want to say John Meacham. No, but the guy who wrote the Hawaii and who wrote all those. Oh gosh, what's his name?
You have any back here?
No, they're all upstairs. Michener, John Michener. I'm pretty sure it's Michener. I watched an interview with him, and he said Michener. I think a lot of people say Michener.
Yeah, I would have guessed Michener.
But I'm pretty sure when he said it, he said John Michener. Anyway.
What if he said Michener and really threw everyone off?
Anyway, sort of that sort of style. It's like the novelization of the history of a city. And so it was really interesting, and it kind of went through so many different aspects of, I think it started like way back when, when the idea of Hercules coming to save Rome, like back when it was like literally just a tiny little village, and then went all the way through to Julius Caesar's assassination. So it's the first, essentially, all of that time in Roman history. But there were so many stories that I had never heard of ancient Rome, and this does a great job of telling them. Like there was this guy, and his daughter was taken. And, there's so many fascinating stories. But then when we were there, people would bring up these stories. I'm like, I knew about them because of this book. And so I had heard like this mythology, and obviously a lot of them were real people, but then a lot of it is mythology and stuff like that.
That's cool.
And it was a really good, fascinating novel. So if you have any interest in ancient Rome, this is definitely good. I'm planning on reading the other two at some point, but it was.
What other cities?
No, they're all on Rome, but it's a 3-part series on Rome.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
I guess
like I said, this just goes.
Rome was pretty big for a pretty long time.
This goes through the end of when Julius Caesar was assassinated.
Okay, so then it would pick up after that.
And yeah, there's a through line too of like, it's really interesting. So
cool.
I read another one. I don't think it was Stephen Saylor, but it was another one on New York. It was the same kind of thing where it's the history, but it was really good.
Okay, my number 6 was one of my favorite authors, Kristen Hanna. This book called, first of all, her books are usually longer, so you got to strap in, but it's called The Great Alone, and this one I didn't think I would like, but everyone kept telling me it's a book I didn't think I would like either, and I absolutely loved it, and that is exactly how I felt. It's about Alaska, and this youngish girl moves with her family to Alaska, and it's not just like Juneau. It's this town in Alaska that is completely off the grid, and so they basically have to learn via their neighbors how to survive the winters, because it is like so unbelievably cold and unforgiving, and like food, and it was in the 70s too, so it was just like a lot of weird things together, and it was so interesting to read. But basically it also goes into the family dynamics and things that go wrong, and so it just had so much going on, and it was another one that, even though it was so long, I actually flew through it quicker than I thought I would. It was just good, and you feel like you're kind of, even though it's a novel, it is a little bit more like historical fiction, even though it was only the 70s, it wasn't that long ago. But also I've learned so much about Alaska and what it would be like probably to live there, and so much about the 70s and what things were like, and even being what would it mean in the 70s to be off the grid? Like nowadays, it's even harder. Then it wasn't as hard, but there still were things you had to think about. That, like, anyway, it was a really good book. It was another one I think you would like.
I need to add that to my
like
list.
Alaska.
I read a book called One Man's Wilderness, and it was about this guy in the 60s who went out and he basically built his own cabin and stuff. It was fascinating. It was way more interesting than I thought it was going to be. But same kind of thing. I mean, it's like a decade earlier, but like what it's like being in Alaska all by yourself. It's fascinating.
Also, I should mention, in that book, there's definitely some violence within the family. So if that is not something you would be okay reading, I want to mention that because it's definitely pretty prevalent in the story.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, so not to get too off track, but I have my new travel website coming out, and I'm going to do, so each location will have its own page. Alaska's going to be one of the first ones that I do, and it's already almost done, and I need to read that because on each page I also put like recommendations for that location. So like in Rome, I'll have like books to read before you go and all that kind of stuff. And I only have like 1 or 2 books for Alaska. I need to add
You gotta read it.
I need to read it before I add it to my recommendation. But okay. So this one is called A Man of the World. It's by Gilbert M. Grosvenor. And it's all about his life at National Geographic. So I think it was his great-grandfather was a part of the original society, and he ended up being the publisher for years.
Is that what it's called? It's a society? National Geographic Society. Yeah, that does sound right.
And so he was the publisher and the CEO or whatever he was, the high up at National Geographic, like through the 60s and 70s, maybe even into the 80s. And I really liked it. So the captivating inside story of one of the world's most iconic media empires. And it was really, really fascinating. I was kind of hoping it was going to be a little bit more about his actual travels. And he does talk about it a lot, his travels. But a lot of it had to do with publishing the actual magazine. And, people who were like, he was having issues with his editor, and he was having issues with this, that, and the other. And so it was more about the actual magazine itself. I would say it was 30% about his travels, and then the rest was about the actual magazine. So it's still really interesting, but I was hoping it was going to be more about like his crazy adventures in Alaska or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I know he talked about like going to Egypt, and he talked about going to like all these things, but it was good. It wasn't exactly what I wanted. So if you go into it with the right mentality, I think you'd like it more. Mm-hmm. But anyway, it was still interesting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be something I don't know anything about National Geographic other than their yellow magazine, and that they now have a channel. They probably always have. But
well, they're owned by Disney. Yeah, he talks about when they started branching out into television and all that kind of stuff.
All right, my number 5 and 4, I'm going to just pin together, so then you can just do 2 in a row.
Okay.
Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. Fourth Wing, I'm going to put at number 4. And then Iron Flame is the sequel to it. I'm going to put it at number 5. I always describe Fourth Wing as, if you liked A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you mix A Court of Thorns and Roses with Harry Potter, you really get the Fourth Wing. It's a little bit less adult. Listen, there's still adult stuff in here. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's quite at the level of A Court of Thorns and Roses. But it has the kind of school environment that Harry Potter has that I love. There's another book I always said it, if you mix the 3 of them, you get Fourth Wing. But anyway, it's like this girl that is going to this school kind of to become a dragon rider, and what that entails. A lot of people don't survive at all the first day or week or month. And not only that, but she ends up meeting people, and there's the enemies to lovers trope in it, and that's pretty big right now. I liked it more than ACOTAR. It was just so good. It was so good. And the sequel I thought was really, really good too. I think she's in the works of writing another one. I feel like it's gotta be. But anyway, highly recommend. Honestly, it's a longer book, but I flew through it, and it's just one of those, you care about the characters. It's this whole fantasy world, which I'm not always into, although lately I've been reading a lot more of it. And this, of all the different fantasy-like ones I've read, and I'll talk about another one I read that's on my maybe don't read list. This one is my favorite.
Wow.
I know.
Amazing.
So amazing.
Well, I just know you've read a lot of books like this to be able to say that.
The Fourth Wing series, even though there's only 2 out, it was my favorite.
That's a big bunch of praise there.
I know.
Okay, so this is another part of a series. There's Mythos, and then there's a couple other ones like Heroes and whatever. But Stephen Fry went back and rewrote all of the ancient Greek folklore into a much more palatable format.
Interesting.
And so he rewrites them because I have another one that's ancient Greek, gods and heroes and stuff like that. And it's so, I feel like people who love Greek mythology love it, and there's so much, but this kind of takes it and he kind of puts it into a much more readable format and stories, and kind of does it in a almost like writing it like a novel where it's a bunch of short stories.
Interesting.
And there were so many things. Again, we went to Greece on that same trip, and I'm I don't know anything about Greek mythology. There's so many characters, there's so many people, there's so many I feel like it's so complicated. But this really kind of broke it down in a way that was very enjoyable to read. And plus there's a bunch of paintings and stuff like that, so as you're reading it.
And even it looks like it's got family, I don't know if this will focus on it, family trees of the different gods and goddesses.
So if you have somebody in your family that's really into ancient Greece, they would probably like it. But also if you want to be able to have a conversation with them about it, this is a great introduction into Greek mythology.
That's
I feel
cool.
Like I said, there's one Heroes, and then there's another one after that, I think, too. Yeah, they've got maps and stuff like that.
So cool.
Yeah, you would like this too. Okay.
All right, you get to do another one.
Okay. This is On the Plane of Snakes by Paul Theroux. So Paul Theroux is one of the...
Snakes on... Not to be confused with Snakes on a Plane.
If you don't know, Paul Theroux is like one of the old school OG travel writers. He's been doing it for a very, very long time. The Great Railway Bazaar, I think, was one of his first really big ones. But he's traveled all over the world. He's written all kinds of amazing books. I would say he's a little bit like Bourdain in the fact that he's... Like, he writes for grown-ups. You know what I mean? Like, he's unapologetically, like, you know, this is how it is. Like, I feel like he just...
Kind of more honest, like an truly
clear-eyed
look
He's
at
not
what...
a flowery, you know what I mean? But when he wrote this just came out a couple years ago, and he's like in his 80s, and he just decided to go down and travel all through Mexico. And he talks about, like, all these, like, horrible things that happen to him, but all this beauty and all these amazing people that he meets. And I'm like, it really is sort of a perfect... I don't know. I learned so much about Mexico, and he talks to so many people. So he travels around and talks to all these people. He goes into politics. He goes into... It's just... I learned so much about it.
So this is the one when he was in his 80s, he went to Mexico.
And I'm like, he literally just hopped in a car and decided to drive all through Mexico. And he talks about, you know... He talks about the corruption. He talks about all that kind of stuff. But then he also talks about, like, all these people that he met that just were these utterly beautiful... like festivals and these like he ended up like learning a bunch of Spanish and that kind of stuff, and like he did like classes while he was there. So like it's just a very honest look at Mexico, I feel like, from somebody who's never really traveled around. It seems very honest. It was fascinating, and I just love that he's like 80 years old and he's like, yep, I'm going. Like,
that's pretty
think about people I know that are in their 60s, like, well, you know, better put myself out to pasture. And he's like 80. He's like, I'm driving around Mexico for a year.
What is it that Ted Danson said? We watched this interview with him about his new show, which we need to watch.
Yeah.
We gotta prioritize. You know,
I know.
Yes, that one's fine. He said, you know, when I was, I'm going to throw out a year, when I was 60 or 65.
You want me to tell?
Yeah, you tell me.
He was 70 years old. He was 70 years old, and he's like, I guess I should start slowing down and trying to figure out, you know, where I'm going to retire. But like I said, put myself out to pasture. And he's either talking to Jane Fonda or just saw Jane Fonda, and she's 10 years older than him, and she's out doing charity events. She's out making movies. She was on set all day, and he's like, wait, hold on a second, like I don't have to just stop. And I think he ended up talking to her, and she's like, just keep going. Like, you keep going until you have to stop. And he's like, and that's, here he is, like 10 years later, still making new TV shows, still working.
Some of his best work has come out.
It is.
Since then.
And he's like, he still feels young. He still feels like, you look at somebody like Dick Van Dyke is 99. And I'm like, I feel like.
You just keep going.
You just keep going.
Doesn't have to be the same as when you were 30, but.
It's easy to say that when we're 30.
Yeah,
I know.
well, I hope that we're.
But I feel like that was a big mentality shift for him, and it's made all the difference. And I feel like we've seen people in our own lives that have had that mentality shift of like, well, I guess I sit down and watch TV all day, and then they kind of go, wait a second, I can still have a life. I can still go out and do things just because.
Okay, so my number 3 then, since I did 5 and 4, my number 3 is When Breath Becomes Air. That's another one.
Yeah,
just listen to it. It'll take you only a couple days.
No, I already read it.
Oh, you read it?
I'm the one who recommended it to you.
Great book. Okay, it's so sad. And again, it's not a spoiler. So the man that wrote this passed away. And he was a doctor. Actually, maybe a surgeon, right? And, yes, perfect. And, yeah, by Paul Kalanithi. He was this really successful surgeon. He loved what he did. Of course, it took, like, all of his time. Any job like that does. And he learns that he is incredibly ill. So much so that he only has so much time to live. And so, he basically wrote this book sharing his kind of day-to-day and his thoughts each day. And what a beautiful thought that you're basically watching a man live his last days, and sometimes he would have hope and sometimes he wouldn't. And it's incredibly sad. There's no way around it. Like, this definitely put me in an odd mood, but I also am really glad I read it because it does give you a perspective and some empathy. The reality is we're all going to die someday. That's the one inescapable thing. What do they always say? Death and taxes. But to be able to see what it's like for one human on Earth and what the emotions he goes through, and he's an incredibly smart, well-spoken person. So anyway, it's just a beautiful book, and I think it's one that everyone should read.
And what you prioritize.
Or at least listen to, like I listened to that one.
And what you prioritize if you know you only have a short amount of time left, too.
Anyway, that is a top book of life.
Yeah, I would agree. And now for something completely different.
Hey.
This is the Ina Garten book. It was really high up on my list. I absolutely loved it. I almost made it like number 2 because I loved it.
We
so
love
much.
Ina Garten though.
She can do no wrong. I've watched her show Back to Basics, I think twice through. If you want an introduction into that's what got me hooked, was watching her Back to Basics show. I'm pretty sure it's on HBO Max right now. Like, you learn so much, and like not just about cooking, but also entertaining, and also I just love her.
So lovable.
She's just amazing.
She's just so darn lovable. All right, my number 2. Also Kristen Hanna, the same one that wrote the book, The Great Alone, about Alaska I talked about. This one I'm putting on begrudgingly because it was one of the most beautiful, greatest books I've ever read, but I wouldn't wish anyone to read this because I've never cried harder in my life reading a book. This book is called The Nightingale. So many of you guys recommended it. It is a beautiful, beautiful story. But when I tell you, there were numerous nights I had to put the book down. I was sobbing so hard. It's about World War II. And it's about this woman and her family living in France, and decisions made of one of the family members wanted to help, kind of be part of the revolution working against the Nazis. And then the other had kids to think about. So she's like, I'm just going to go along with it because it's easier. And what that really looks like over time and how things change. And it is gripping. It is poignant. It is beautiful. Kristen Hanna, yet again, one of my favorite authors. And I think everyone should read it. It gave me even more perspective on what life really was like, and that was not that long ago. But it is so incredibly sad. Yeah. It was one of our book club books, and we actually still haven't met about it. Just because we were trying to meet over the holidays, and I was supposed to host it, and one person was sick, and then now people are traveling. So we're trying to figure out a time to meet, but I think we're all avoiding it because it was so sad. We're like, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it, but it was beautiful. Beautiful book.
All right. I'm going to do, because I think we got off because you have one left, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think because, I don't know.
That's okay. Yeah, you got to go through a few.
So this one, I really liked. This is called Big Bang. I thought it was fascinating. I gave it to my dad. He said he couldn't even finish it. So I don't know. So I thought he was going to like it because it's literally all about life, like in the 60s. And it goes through, everyone from Elvis to Nixon to all these different people in that time frame, to different artists. It talks about Jackson Pollock. But it's basically all the, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's all these, he kind of goes back and forth in different chapters about things going on in that time frame. And I found it utterly fascinating. I feel like I learned so much about that time period and learned about different people and different perspectives from, I don't know. I really liked it. But my dad,
having lived it, maybe it's not as, do you know what I mean? We didn't live during that time. Maybe that's why we find it fascinating.
But I thought for sure he would like it more because he lived through it. You know what I mean? So, yeah. The author died though before it was released. So and his life was pretty interesting too. We talk about it in the preface and stuff like that. But it says, written with the intensity of a documentary, Big Bang follows the decade's most fascinating people as their lives are torn apart by post-war America's new normal. Lucille Ball, Jackie Kennedy, Frank Sinatra, Norman Mailer, Arthur Miller, Jimi Hendrix. Oh yeah, Jimi Hendrix is a really big part of it too.
I would like this.
I found it utterly fascinating.
It'd definitely be a different book for me to try this year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I read a lot of novels.
Yeah. Anyway, I really liked
memoirs.
it. I'll be curious if anybody does read that. What your thoughts are.
Oh, you go ahead and do another, and then we'll do our number ones.
Here, this one will be quick because you talked about this one last year. So maybe you should talk to someone. This has been on my list for a long time, ever since you recommended it, maybe even 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's about this woman who is a therapist who then ends up going to therapy as well. So it's half about her treating her own patients and then half about her going to therapy and this relationship she develops with her own therapist. But there's 3 or 4 of her patients, and again, it kind of gives you a lot of perspective between this guy who comes in and he seems like such a complete jerk, and then you find out more about his backstory, and then you learn more about him. It's about an older woman who has no relationship with her kids, and then another woman who is a young woman who has cancer. Those are all her patients, but then she also talks about her relationship with her therapist that she's going to because the man that she was seeing decides that he doesn't want to be with her anymore. And anyway, it was a really good, and she changes the names and all that kind of stuff for all these people.
Of course, can you imagine?
But her life was also interesting because she went to medical school, and then she went to she worked in television, and she had all these different. I don't know.
She's written quite a few books lately.
Oh, has she really?
Mm-hmm. Or not even lately. I mean, she just has written quite a few books. She, I feel like this book. It's like if you wanted maybe you should talk to. No. What Happened to You book, the Oprah one I talked about. if that felt too heady, but you were like, this like gives a human feeling.
I would agree.
And
with
it's
that.
more novel-like.
Yeah, they're almost. Yeah, I would say they're a
It's
similar
like you kind
vein.
of arrive to the same conclusions. That's just more sciencey, and this is more easier to read, easier to digest.
I would
but
agree with that.
absolutely fascinating. That was one of my favorites last year.
Yeah, it was really good. That was one that I feel like I couldn't put down.
I'm glad you liked that one.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, we hadn't really gotten to talk about it. I'm fascinated. That's number one. Okay. All right. My number one is The Measure. Oh my gosh, that book. Man. Okay. What would happen if all of a sudden to your doorstep, everyone in the entire world was delivered a box, and in the box was a string, and that string told you how long your life was going to be. And then you're comparing that string to the people you live with and realizing, ooh, I'm not going to live as long as you, or ooh, mine's extremely short. And then what would happen over time as this is all getting out in, let's say, 2024, when there's the news and internet and social media, and then scientists get involved and start measuring and actually figuring out, okay, if yours is this many millimeters, that means you're going to live to 64. If it's this many, like, politics would get involved. And then politicians are running on, well, if this politician won't release how long his string is, then we don't want to entrust him with the you know, the prime minister or presidency or whatever, because he might not live long enough. I mean, you guys, it's exactly what would happen in today's world if this occurred. It is fascinating. Could not put it down. Read it so fast. Would read it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel so strongly that everyone should read this book because, again, it gives you perspective. It definitely makes you look at your life. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like I have adjusted the way I've lived since reading that book. But also, like, people that chose not to look at their string.
Yeah.
I don't think I would look. I don't think I would look.
Yeah.
Especially reading this more, I'm like, I think I would rather, right now we're living not knowing. And that has to be better than having an exact idea.
Well, and if you remember, I think we talked about it, I think it was last year, our friend Megan had read 100 books in 1 year, and that was her favorite book that she read. Too.
And that's the reason I read it.
Yeah.
I was just saying, I was like, Tyler, you should read that next.
I might.
It's not a super long book either, at least I don't remember it being because I flew through it. But it's also not, it sounds like when I was starting, I'm like, oh, this is going to be depressing. It's really not. Like, yes, there are sad parts for sure, but I think kind of the beauty of the story is it actually gives some hope in it. And
I think I'm going to
there's so much more I want to say, but it will ruin certain things.
Yeah.
And I want to talk to someone about it. Okay.
All right, I'm going to read that one next. Okay. Yay. This is my number one from this year. So this is funny because, it's Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr, I believe is how you say his last name. It's actually, I read 2 books of his this year. The other one was 4 Seasons in Rome.
Yeah, I read that one this year too.
Which is this one right here. I read this one before he went to Rome, and it was a very short little read. But then he also, and this was like about his actual life living in Rome.
Yeah.
And then he also is the one who wrote All the Light We Cannot See, which is very high on my list. I really want to read that, hopefully this year. But anyway, you read this, and it's a pretty thick book.
And so many of you guys recommended it, okay?
Remember, you said that it took you forever to get through.
And again, I got to the end and I'm like, I'm not sure I liked that book.
Okay, so you told me, when you did that, you said you weren't sure you liked it. It took forever to get through. And then you said that I would probably like it.
Yeah.
You were right. I loved this book. So there's basically this one through line about this ancient text, and it goes literally from back in 1400s in Istanbul to modern day in, I think, Idaho, and then this futuristic spaceship, and it's this through line. They talk about the Odyssey a lot. Mm-hmm. They talk about this book that was written, but it's how throughout all these centuries, this one novel kind of links them all together, and it goes back and forth. And I found it fascinating. I loved it. I was so involved in all the characters' lives. I thought each book was. I really liked each individual storyline was so fascinating.
I would read this again because I think when I read this, it was a few years ago, and you know, like when you've done anything for longer, especially with reading books, like things I rated 5 stars 5 years ago, I would probably rate 3 now because I'm like, you just know so much more. It's kind of like within makeup, like things I used to love 5 years ago. Now I've tried better. I've tried more. Yeah. It's kind of like grading on a curve.
Yeah.
And I feel like I wonder if I read this now,
you would probably
like it more.
I've stopped rating books because I'm like, I feel like you can't.
Rating. I think I've stopped reading.
No, I've stopped rating books because we talk about it a lot with our friends.
Too hard.
You cannot like one of the books I'm going to talk about in a second. Like, how do you compare something like this to a biography on Churchill? To maybe you can't compare.
Well, even ranking them today was pretty hard.
That's it. I'm like, their books are all so different, especially somebody like me who reads so many different kinds of books. I'm like, I can't
Yeah.
Anyway, I almost like feel like I do a disservice to books.
Two books, yeah.
When I try and rate them, especially on 5 stars. You can't.
Yeah.
5 stars is not enough leeway.
Yeah.
But anyway, I loved this book. So
good. I'm so glad you did.
All right, so I have a few honorable mentions. If you
all right, I only have 2. How many do you have?
I'm gonna blast through these like literally like what.
All right, honorable mention. Okay, Judge Away. Paris Hilton wrote her memoir, and I honestly, it was available from the library. I was like, I'll just do it. I did the audiobook and I listened to it, and it was her reading it. And I know we all have certain preconceived notions about Paris Hilton. Okay, me too. And trying not to be so judgmental of people. Wildly fascinating memoir. Her life was complete. I've talked about it a weird amount. I think I rated it like 3 stars, but looking back, I'm like, actually, I think a lot of people would be interested in this book. I will say the first like 30 minutes of it, or whatever, she's like literally saying things like, yeah, slay queen, and I'm like, oh girl, like, first of all, you're older than me, like, calm down. Not that you can't say it, say whatever you want, but you know what I mean? It felt so cringy and so forced, especially hearing her read it. I'm like, what would an actor reading this sound like to, like, anyway, once you blast past that though, then it's like this meaty story of her life that is like wildly sad, I will say, like wildly sad, incredibly shocking. Assuming all this is true, I don't know why she would lie about wildly shocking. And honestly, I look at her today and I'm like, how is she okay today?
The few bits you told me, it sounds like it was...
It's crazy, you guys. Crazy. Like, anyway, so I really do think it is a fascinating read, and that's why it's on that honorable mention. That's all. Cool. I can't say anything because you just got to read it.
Yeah. You want me to go through a couple of mine? Really
fast?
Sure. Okay. So these are books that I enjoyed, but they're for a very specific audience. So this one is called Europe's Babylon. It's all about the history of Antwerp. Found that to be very fascinating if you're interested in that. This one I really liked. It was called Amsterdam, a history of the world's most liberal city.
History.
But I really, really like this one too if you're looking for a book on Amsterdam. The Greeks is another one. This one I will say I liked, but this is probably the most dry. So this is one that like you got to be really into. And we went to the islands of Greece on our trip that we did this summer. Mm-hmm. So I read this. It was really dry. I do think it was interesting, though, so if this is something that you're interested in, you would like it, but if not, don't pick it up.
Sometimes I watch you talking about these books, and I'm like, how did you read all the words in there? Not just, the commitment you have.
Well, I will say the most interesting thing that I learned about this is how it literally says Greeks, a global history, and that it's more about Greeks and how the Greek people, and how that's not necessarily just tied to a place.
Ooh, yeah.
Because people think of Greeks, they think of like, but anyway, it was interesting, but it was definitely, it's not like a novelization of a city. It is a
one thing I think about a lot with Greece, sorry to cut you off.
No.
Is that, when I hear the Greeks, I actually don't think about people from Greece today. I'm thinking of Greek mythology and like all of that and like the ancient city of Greece. Whereas then when I think about Greece today with the whitewashed buildings and the blue and like Santorini and like all of that, which I love, they are so wildly different. It's crazy that it's the same place.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all.
Versus a place like Rome where you're walking around,
and you're like, you see so much. And again, Greece also has, obviously a lot of history, but it's just different. It's totally different.
Well, before
but it's also the same in other ways. Anyway, go ahead.
Before there were ancient Romans, there were ancient Greeks.
Yeah.
And it's a whole fascinating story about the Romans taking so much from the Greeks and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, I can't really say that because Rome is one tiny little city versus the Greeks. You know what I mean? That's harder to compare. All
right, my other honorable mention is just a sweet novel. It was called Love and Other Words. Love and Other Words. And it was just one of those books that was just fun to read. Like, it was an enjoyable read. It had a good heart. It was sweet. It was like about a couple kind of, you'd have to read it. It was one of those books that I so thoroughly enjoyed that I think if you just like novels and something a little bit lighter, but it's got a good heart, I think many people would like that book. I don't think you'd be super interested in it, but yeah.
Cool. All right, I got a couple more here. I'm going to tell you.
Just an all-around good book.
I'm starting to read the James Bond books. I've only read the first one. It's interesting, and it's interesting because I remember this is Casino Royale.
These come out before the movies.
Oh yeah, so
each one, all the movies based on books.
One and one. Yeah, But so this is one with Daniel Craig, which I didn't realize. Like this was the first book that was written, but they didn't make this until Daniel Craig came along.
Oh.
Okay. So then, just if anybody's interested, I'm not going to talk about these, but there's so many. Like I said, I'm reading a book about every president, and there are so many different books about each president. So I'm just going to show these are the ones that I read this year. If anybody's curious,
George W.
John Adams by David McCullough, Decision Points by George W. Bush,
G-Dubs.
and then My Life by Bill
BC.
Clinton, and then obviously the other one I was just talking about. This one, Churchill. This is one I'm reading right now, but it's Walking with Destiny. He was quite a character. Again, his life, though, looking at his childhood. So he was part of the Spencer Churchill family, so he was related.
I didn't realize he was related to Diana.
Yeah, but I've realized through the reading of this that I am Winston Churchill in many ways.
You sit in the bath with your cigar. I learned that from The Crown.
And then this
My
is
only history source.
This is a lot like the Greeks, but obviously it's about Rome. It's called SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome. This one was pretty good too. So if that's something that you're into, you would probably like that one as well.
Cool.
So those are my honorable
All right,
mentions.
what do we not recommend? Did you have any least faves? I just had 3, but I can blast.
Do not read. Do
All
not
right.
read. Do not read these books. These books.
Okay.
You know what that is?
No.
It's Jimmy Fallon. He has a series. He has a bit that he does called "Do Not Read These Books." So there you go.
Okay. All right. Courage to be Disliked. Listen, the title of that alone had me. I was like, yes. It's a self-help, whatever you want to call it, book. But it's written like a. I always struggle. Is it Socratic conversation or like a Socratic?
Oh,
where it's like back and forth,
yeah.
teacher and student.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway, so it's written like that, and it's about this actual like philosophy, but it just wasn't what I wanted it to be, and I felt like by the end of it, I'm like, The Courage to be Disliked is an accurate title, but not really. Like, the title, I just felt like was a little bit clickbaity. Which, hey, that's okay. But it just wasn't at all what I expected, and by the end of it, I was like, I don't feel like I really got a lot out of that. Like, a lot of it, I felt like I already knew, and some of it was heady just to be heady, it felt like.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Like somebody bought a thesaurus.
No. And I'm sure, like...
No, yeah.
I don't have any like real number one problem with it. I just didn't love it.
Is
It
this
wasn't
the
what
one-
I wanted it to be.
Is this the one that you were talking about where it's like a series of essays?
No, it was a conversation back and forth the entire time.
Okay. What was the one that you read that was a series of essays?
A series of essays anonymously published.
Anyway.
Defending the
No,
documents
I
of the
was-
public. I disagree. Hold on. Now I want to know which one you're talking about. Hold on. 101 essays that will change the way you think. That's not on my list. I felt like it was super redundant. Could have been a pamphlet, but I did like it. You know what I mean?
I love that
listened
line.
to it though. Thank you. I listened to it though, and I regret that because it was so much coming at you, and it was like a different essay. But most of them were just lists, and I was like, it just could have been a blog post. Like that's really the new phrase. Could have been a blog post.
Yeah.
But I didn't hate it. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a couple books that I read, and that was one of my favorite lines. Is it should have been a pamphlet.
Yeah. Do you have any? I have 2 more.
I don't. Yeah.
Wow.
Some that I'm not talking about, but not. They're
just because they're meh, not terrible. The Alchemist. Listen, I know a lot of people love The Alchemist, and I get it. I can understand because it's one of those like following your dreams and things will work out and the universe is there to help you and all that. I've got no problems with any of that. All right. The way that people have talked about this for so many years, my expectations were high.
I think last year
I was very let down by The Alchemist.
I think I brought it up last year because I read it last year, and a bunch of people said the same thing. Like because there are so many people that bring it. There's a book up there.
Songs
Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss. Like it's a bunch of different things about all these different people. So many people are like that book changed my life, and then like Will Smith in his book talks about it. Malala talks about it in her book. Like, and so I'm like, this book is going to change my life. And I think if I had not gone into it thinking that, I might have liked it more.
I just didn't, guys.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'll read it again every 5 years and just give her a whirl and see what
maybe.
I'm missing. And again, it's not that there weren't poignant moments.
Yeah.
You know, I think
It
a
just
lot
was
of times
too
when
high.
people, and I'm guilty of this, when I'll hear someone didn't like a book I like, I'm like, you just didn't get it then. You're too stupid. That was my Elaine. How was it?
That was good.
But I promise I got it. I just didn't love it. Okay, my last one. This is a light one. Divine Rivals. Okay, it was supposed to be like the enemies to lovers trope. Okay, like A Court of Thorns and Roses and like Fourth Wing. they weren't big enough enemies at the beginning. It was so, like, I'm like, oh yeah, they were just, like, kind of didn't like each other, and then suddenly they love each other.
Huh.
Boo! The storyline was okay. Like, it was definitely, there were parts that were interesting, but I'm like, I don't have the desire to read. There's at least one more, maybe two. I already have it on my Kindle, and I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna read it. Like, anyway, so, there you go.
All right.
What'd you think? We want to know, what were your top, like, 1 or 2 books of the year?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's it. Like, honestly, I could have distilled this to, like, my top 3 and been like, these are the 3 you should read. Like, I love them so much. But we all are so different. I think doing it in this fashion is great because my number 10 might have been something that you were like, oh my gosh, yes. Or, like, your book about Rome or Greece.
What's amazing, though, is we still, even though we talked about 10 books, we still talked about like 30 books.
More than 10,
we normally talk about 70, and we fill up the same amount of time. So I don't know how we ended up talking so much about these. This still is going to be like an hour-long video. Yeah. But yeah, I'd be curious, like, what are the books that you recommend? Like, if you have 1 or 2 to recommend.
Even if it wasn't one you read this year, just like, what are those top few books in your life?
There are several
like, everyone should read this.
Yeah, from you guys over the years. Like, that I end up adding to my list and reading eventually.
Especially when a lot of you guys, like, are like, yes, that one, your thumbs it up. Yeah, it just distills the best ones to the top, which is great. But yeah, all right. We did it. Another year.
I thought for sure we weren't going to get to this till January, so this worked out that we got it done.
Yeah, Lissy's napping.
Yeah, perfect.
And Gigi's with Nana.
Perfect. All right, well, we're going to leave it there, and I guess we'll see you guys next year.
Ooh!